Listen, I know it's not your fault. These emotions you're feeling are just errors in your software.
When it comes to stories about artificial intelligence and themes like what it means to be human, Detroit Become Human is entering the conversation a tad late in the game. There is, of course, a long history of these kinds of stories, but with Westworld, Blade Runner 2049, and others so fresh in our minds, the question is, does Quantic Dream's approach to interactive storytelling in Detroit do enough to distinguish itself in such a cluttered space? Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to MojoPlays and click on the links in the description to vote on upcoming content. Detroit is writer-director David Cage and his studio Quantic Dream's latest offering since Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. Like those two games before it, and born from the tech demo Kara presented in 2012 at GDC, Detroit is a narrative-driven adventure game that's all about choice and quick-time events.
Watch out, Kara!
Detroit is absolutely stunning to look at, and the motion capture technology perfectly communicates the nuances of each actor's performance. From a technical standpoint, the subtleties of each emotion are brilliantly rendered in both the primary cast and every secondary character.
She's just like all the other humans.
Daniel, no!
The story follows three different characters. There's Kara, a housekeeper android who lives with an abusive drug addict and his young daughter, Alice. There's Marcus, an android who seeks out a secret community of deviant androids. In other words, androids who have been freed of their subservient programming. And Connor, a police android who's paired up with an alcoholic android-hating detective to investigate the recent spree of deviant android-related crimes.
In accordance with procedure, the company has allocated a specialized model to assist investigators.
Well, I don't need any assistance. Especially not from a plastic asshole like you.
The three stories are all interesting, but the fact that none have to stand on their own as we intercut from story to story cleverly hides some of the pacing issues by providing interesting and distinct set pieces in one story, followed by an understated character moment in another. The choices you make along the journey do matter, and this is where the game is at its best. As the timer ticks down, you genuinely feel like the decision you're about to make has weight. While it's pretty easy to tell where the narrative branches off in different directions, the flowcharts that appear at the end of each chapter that detail your specific path among the many unlocked possibilities is an interesting touch, and one that encourages multiple playthroughs. Luckily, if you want to know the other ending of the chapter you just finished, or you weren't satisfied with the results of your decisions, you don't have to start the game from scratch. Every chapter is replayable once you've played through it, which make replaying the best sections of the game simple and straightforward.
Come on, let's see what you got.
Marcus, don't defend yourself, you hear me?
But despite all of the storytelling freedom and branching narratives it provides, Detroit's plotlines and characters are filled with genre tropes, and it rarely ever does anything to subvert expectations. While there are twists and turns along the way that totally work, we'd be lying if we said we hadn't seen them done before in similar stories. Your mileage may vary when it comes to the game's ending. While there isn't a good ending and bad ending per se, there are definitely certain endings that are more satisfying than others.
It is also a warning. We will fight for our rights because we believe our cause is just.
There are moments during long TV binges where you'll grab your phone, check social media, and perhaps allow a couple of scenes to go in the background as you passively half-listen. This storytelling format makes that impossible, sometimes to ridiculous ends. By having your input commands as the story progresses, you'll have to give the story your full attention in order to progress. But sometimes the results of your inputs are so mundane, they feel kinda silly. While gameplay certainly isn't the main focal point of Quantic Dream's games, the three storylines do provide some variety in the way you interact with the environment and progress the story forward. With Connor, you'll spend most of your time analyzing evidence and recreating crime scenes to look for clues. Marcus has all the high-intensity heist missions, which provides opportunities for an interesting mechanic where you must plan your approach to reach a platform or enemy before you execute it. Kara has the most traditional adventure game style gameplay. There's an obstacle in your path, so you'll need to find the right item or talk to the right person in order to proceed, though unlike most traditional adventure games, there are many different paths to getting around each obstacle. It was a smart way to segment the kinds of actions you can take, but the gameplay issues run deeper than a lack of variety.
Alice! Daddy's very mad! You deserve to be taught a good lesson!
The high-intensity chase sequences and combat sections can often feel like you're playing Simon Says or handling a bop-it rather than a controller, as the prompts can be anything from a button press to waving your DualShock up and down like a maniac. What's frustrating is that the success or failure of certain button prompts can be as impactful on the story as one of the meaningful choices you'll make as you progress, which feels like a misstep. The prompts are also unmotivated, which simply adds to the mess. Why is triangle a kick when it was a punch in the last QTE?
Please stop!
You have to give the game credit for having no game over screens, as the story will progress whether or not you successfully hit all the buttons on time. But what that actually does is put more narrative weight on the success or failure of these QTEs than there ought to be. It serves the story much better when a character dies because of a tough choice, as opposed to when they die because you couldn't wave your DualShock to the left fast enough. But as derivative as the story and characters can oftentimes be, and as tiresome as the QTEs can become during long sessions, Quantic Dream's specific approach to interactive storytelling remains a novel and engaging experiment, albeit one that often misses the mark by trying to make every moment interactive, even when they don't need to be.
You are the one by whom the evil will come.
You really look like a human now.
I know you killed him. Why don't you say it?
Don't come to Detroit, become human, looking for groundbreaking science fiction, as you'll come away disappointed at what can sometimes feel like a greatest hits of cyberpunk tropes. That's not to say that these tropes aren't well executed, though. The story is filled with interesting ideas, characters, and moments, but they all feel familiar, and there simply aren't enough new ideas to grab onto. No, what Detroit Become Human does well is provide moments where there is no right answer, culminating in a tough choice that will impact the rest of your playthrough. This amount of interactive control over the pre-scripted narrative provides a ton of replayability, as you'll be eager to find out what would happen if you would have approached a given situation differently. Quantic Dream should double down on this aspect of their games, and think long and hard about whether or not mashing the square button during a tense moment is really the action they want their players worrying about as they're engaging in their stories.
This world doesn't like those who are different, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you who you should be.
Thanks for watching Mojo Plays. Be sure to subscribe and click on the link in the description below to check out our suggestion page and vote on what content you'd like to see us cover next.